Hi, everyone, and welcome to another crazy episode of Data Security Talk. My name is Guy Bavly, and I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Actifile. And together with me is Asaf, our CTO. Asaf, we're talking today about CIS. Can you give me a brief overview of the CIS control framework before we dive into more details?
Yes, it's great to be here, first of all. Thanks for having me here. So CIS framework is a general purpose framework for helping improve the security stance of organizations. It follows a long list of uh, specific purpose regulations and frameworks that are intended for different organizations, for example, DoD, for example, healthcare, for example, credit cards, and so forth. And there was no general purpose framework for everyone. I mean, you can go to the ISO 27001 angle and devise your own set of controls. But for a lot of organizations, going through that process and defining their own risk criteria and defining what their stance needs to be is a little bit of a high kind of requirement. So CIS came up with the CIS controls, which includes the standard security, everything from access controls, vulnerability assessment, things such as having firewalls and multi-factor authentication, all the regular stuff, and putting it in a very prescriptive, so you can hand it to your IT managers, to the people who you employ as IT managers, and tell them to follow and come back and fill in the questionnaires, and then you'll know what your security stance is. So it's very prescriptive. It's very reasonable. There are no weird controls like requiring FIPS, right? If you're a bank, you know you require FIPS. If you're a DoD, you know you require FIPS. But if you're a general purpose user, having encryption, using encryption, and so forth, you don't need unreasonable requirements on your security. So very reasonable, very easy to follow. So very prescriptive, and it helps you avoid mistakes. So if something were to happen, you can go to the auditor and say, "Listen, we follow the recommended prescriptive security. We've done our best," and that will help a lot in uh, evaluating whether a certain company is being negligent or being responsible in addressing the cybersecurity landscape.
So, if I understand correctly, the reason CIS is considered the gold standard in cybersecurity, it's because it's broad, general purpose type of framework that you can apply very easily for any type of an organization. And it includes all the necessary controls across the different, areas, sections, topics that cybersecurity has. Is this a good, explanation why we're looking at CIS today, and why is it considered the gold standard?
So I don't know what a gold standard is. A gold standard reminds me of the DISA days and the gold standard disk and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's anything such a as a gold standard. For healthcare, for, as we said, healthcare, credit cards, DoD, financial institutions, and all those have their very specific regulations with they're mandated to follow those regulations. The developers of software systems, for example, for medical record systems or banking financial systems, have to follow certain criteria and so forth. But there was nothing until now for that is general purpose, in that everybody can use if they're not under a specific regulatory framework. So
So,
obviously, if you mhm.
so if you're an
so
MSP,
obviously,
if you're an MSP, okay, if you're an
Mhm.
MSP and you're listening to our our data security talk, why should you care about CIS controls? What's in it in terms of helping MSPs and MSSPs to do their job better at the end of the day?
Okay, so if you look from the perspective of MSPs, and it's our belief that MSPs and MSSPs are merging. So what happens is that in terms of services that an MSP can provide to their customers, obviously things such as providing pre-configured laptops, from setting up network control, from doing all these types of things, obviously that's a requirement. But also making the representations that the MSP is looking after the security of their customer and the customer's information, and whatever regulatory requirements that their customers face is very important. It's an additional added benefit sort of offering. And to an extent, also from the perspective of the MSP, right? The MSP wants to defend its own, its own regulatory and its own culpability to security. And if you're just, if you don't have processes and procedures, if you can't show what it is that you're doing that is uniform across your customer base, then if something were to happen, it becomes an interesting case, and whether the fact that you did apply these certain controls to this certain customer or you didn't, whether that is an issue. Now, something like CIS 8, and I'm not saying that CIS is the only one, but obviously you can do ISO 27001 if you really want to and have the time. But if you want to follow something prescriptive, then something like a CIS 8 is great at making sure that all of your customers, you're treating all of your customers with a baseline that is considered ample in the marketplace today. And CIS 8 is one of those
So,
frameworks that is considered ample.
so you're
And
saying
you can
that,
basically.
yeah,
Mhm.
you're saying in essence, you're saying here's a best, practice template, standing over here over the shelf. You can take that template. It's general purpose. It's very broad. It, contains all the relevant controls for you as a standard organization. And if you implement it in a broad standard, a way for all your customers, then you have a framework that will make sure that you're adhering to all the relevant security controls. You're providing a best in class security service, and all you need to do is just follow the processes and guidelines that CIS8 has within their framework. Did I understand correctly what the benefit for MSPs is?
To an extent, I wouldn't call it best in class. I would call it best effort. So, in a lot of cases, obviously, best in class is very expensive, and you have to balance between the risks and the cost of security. If you have a customer that has not a lot of information and doesn't have a lot of devices and doesn't have a lot of risk, then obviously using the best in class security systems is not always warranted. It might be too expensive. So I would say that it creates the framework which helps you choose what
Mm,
is the correct sort of security solution for your customer. Do they have private information? Do they have intellectual property? Do they have credit cards? And obviously, if they collect credit cards, then they're under PCI DSS, so that takes them into another framework. But if they don't, what is it that's reasonable for them? What is a set of controls that are reasonable for them?
So for the MSP, it's the standardization, it's a framework to follow, it's the ability to quickly implement something that is templatized. What are the benefits of the MSP customers gaining? What are the benefits they're gaining from the MSP or the MSSP, implementing CIS 8 for their, use?
So first of all, one of the things that we find that best MSPs do is they communicate what they do to their customers. So, right. So at the end of the day, I think Bruce Schneier coined the phrase security theater, right? Security theater was, um, it came from, I think, from after 9/11, there was all the checks at the airports, right? The TSA and stuff like that. And a lot of it was, you knew that it was overkill. And he coined the term security theater. And the security theater is this concept that you show to your customers that you're actually providing value, that you're actually looking at the fundamental requirements of security, and you took into consideration everything from securing access controls, from securing the network, from going through vulnerability assessment, by setting up multi-factor authentication, by showing the customer that you're following a process and that process has an ROI, so return on mitigation, if you will, of their security threats. And I think that, and improving their security posture. So I think that being able to put everything in a framework and then turning that into a report that you can share maybe once a quarter, maybe twice a year with your customers really highlights what the MSP brings to the table. Because for a lot of you have to think about it, finding a kid that knows how to set up a printer might be easier. It might probably has been easier in the past than it is today, but finding a kid who can set up a network is not that hard. But finding somebody who can make heads or tails with the security requirements and presenting it in a business relevant way rather than a technology relevant way is much harder. And so
Yeah.
that is a benefit that an MSP can provide that we see the best MSPs do.
So you're touching a very important topic, Asaf, in this conversation, which is the business that's justification or the business case for CIS controls. So what you're saying, if I understand correctly, that MSPs can use the CIS controls to justify their services and frame the conversation to show the return of investment, or as you call it, return on mitigation of implementing those controls. Without the framework, there's an open discussion. It's not structured. There's no way to follow what needs to be done. And customers are buying into a standard, operating procedure, SOP, which is the CIS, and they're seeing that the MSP has organized, well, a repeated type of providing those services because they're adhering to an industry, not best in class, but best practice control framework. Does that resonate well with you? Is this the business case for implementing CIS for MSPs?
That is definitely, yes. So when we talk security, a lot of times we talk about obfuscation, we talk about putting honeypots, of being smarter than the bad guys. Now, it is fun to do that. It is fun to do pen testing. It is fun to follow vulnerability assessments and do stuff like that, which is technical.
If
It's a
that's
lot
your
of
kind
fun.
of fun. If that's your kind of fun,
That is fun for us CTOs. It's the biggest fun.
I'm with
But
you.
but you have to remember that from a legal and a compliance perspective, then following a standard has always been sort of like the American way. So if you look at all the self-regulating and self-regulatory sort of organizations, it's all about defining metrics that are universal and then following them. In that case, it's sort of like I did what everybody is doing, what is expected of me, and I live up to the expectations, again, based on the risk that I have, that I face. Do people want to steal what I have? If they don't want to steal what I have, then maybe I don't need to lock it up. But it's really about establishing that baseline and following that baseline so that you have sort of, herd
Yeah.
protection.
Yeah.
And again, it's not guaranteed, it's not anything, but at the end of the day, having that sort of standard is really helpful when you manage your MSP, and also from if you're an owner of an MSP business, how can you be sure that all of your administrators are following the same process? Obviously, some of your administrators are better than others. Some of them have security backgrounds, some of them don't. How do I know that all of my 100, 500, 1,000 customers have a uniform level of security? Uniform in a sense that they underwent the same process. Maybe at the end, some of them have better EDRs than others or more systems than
Yeah.
others. Some might have databases that you need to protect. Some might have other sort of applications that you need to protect. But how do you make sure that it's all more or less uniform? So
Yeah. So you also touched on something very interesting a couple of minutes ago, which I want to go back to, which is bridging the gap between what we refer to as the CIS 8 framework and, compliance frameworks such as HIPAA or GDPR and so on. So I'm assuming there is a synergy between them and maybe a potential overlap. And is CIS 8, a stepstone, a step in the way of implementing those privacy, frameworks or a regulation? Is that something you recommend doing side by side? How do you perceive this, very interesting, relationship between those privacy regulations and CIS 8 security framework?
So first of all, not all of them are prescriptive. For example, HIPAA does have some privacy rules and so forth, but doesn't have all the network security requirements and stuff like that. So not all of them are prescriptive, and not all of them are comprehensive. So definitely, if I have a general purpose regulation and then I need to fill some content into that, then CIS 8 might help. But there are alternatives, like for example, high trust for HIPAA and so forth. In a lot of cases, and in other cases, so for example, if we take FedRAMP, right, then the requirements are considerably more, let's call it more comprehensive um, than, for example, CIS 8 control. So obviously, if you're a DoD contractor, then following FedRAMP and CMMC and so forth is going to directly, without going through ISO. And I do think that if you already have ISO, if you already have CIS 8, it's going to make your life a little bit easier going through FedRAMP, but not that much easier, because the level of controls required under the sort of the DoD requirements are much higher. So I think it's helpful. And one of the things that I think is probably going to be, we're going to see more and more of it, is we are seeing more and more privacy regulations come down from the state level or from local government level, and we see requirements coming down from things like the bar and the accounting standards bodies and so forth. So as time progresses, even businesses that are not regulated today are probably going to, at some point in time, undergo regulation. And the majority of them, they're going to be standardized around the basic security controls that as they are implemented in CIS 8. So having CIS 8 is obviously going to be very helpful as you need to prepare more and more of your customers to be compliant to some new regulation or framework.
So what I'm hearing from you, Asaf, is two things. First of all, the privacy regulations are not prescriptive, so you need a prescriptive, very detailed, a best practice framework to build the security controls, and that will support any type of privacy regulation which is not prescriptive or detailed or providing guidance in
Exactly.
it. I think that's the main, and that's a very important value proposition, because if you read HIPAA or GDPR, they're not providing you with guidance what to do. They're just stating what you need to keep, a watch off and so on. So, but moving a little bit further, what do you see as the practical challenges, of implementing CIS control? If I'm an MSP or MSSP that want to, adopt and implement CIS, what are the common hurdles that you hear of? Resource limitations, client pushback, and how do you see MSPs overcome those challenges? And maybe they need to prioritize the implementation of CIS. Take certain parts of it first. What's your thoughts about that? Of practically implementing it.
So anyone who's been through any sort of audit, whether it's ISO or high trust or PCI and so forth, anybody who's gone one of these regulatory sort of audit will tell you that the first time around it's the hardest. So there's like you have this pack of paper and you have this thing that you have to fill, and you have people who are the IT guys are in it for the IT, right? For the technical sense, and not so much for the audit and going through the bureaucracy. It's sort of very bureaucratic in nature. So I would say the biggest stumbling block is getting your employees on board that this is something that is a requirement. So selling to them the idea of what it means to, and why it's good for the business and why it's good for them, even personally, right, to be able to follow such a prescriptive methodology. And then you have to, and any good auditor will tell you that it's a matter of perseverance, going through an Excel spreadsheet line by line. Eventually, you will get to the last line. You know, each one, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, you have 1,000 lines. Eventually, you get to the bottom of it. And I think from an MSP perspective, there's a lot of shortcuts MSPs can take. So a lot of MSPs will standardize on different authentication methods. A lot of MSPs will standardize on a firewall or an antivirus or a vulnerability assessment tool and so forth. So a lot of the controls, to say or otherwise, can be mapped to systems across all of their customers. So think about and take the Excel for the different sys controls, put each one of your customers in a column, and then you have an entire column filled in. An entire row filled in, and then another row filled in, and then another row filled in.
Yeah.
So,
So
and
yeah.
that will take care of I would say about 50% of the requirements, and then you're left with the rest of it. And the rest of it is those, first of all, for example, those customers that are unwilling to do multi-factor authentication, or how do you handle things such as data risk, right? Because data risk is different for each one of the customers, unlike an antivirus, which all of the customers need. So, what do you do about those controls that are individual? And for those, obviously, what you want to do is you want to think of it from a risk perspective. So, which one of your customers deals with private data? Which one of your customers have um, other regulatory controls such as DoD, CMMC controls, and so forth. And you start mapping those, and you say, for these customers, we have to deal with this, and these customers, we can wait, and
so
and start filling in those
yeah.
empty.
So what I'm hearing from you, Asaf, is first of all, get your employees onboarded and explain them, the reasoning and the benefits. Second of all, you're saying just do it. The way Nike says, just start doing it, and you'll find out very quickly that probably 50% of the controls are can be mapped already to the products and services you are providing. So just start doing it and you'll see the light very quickly. And then there is a group of controls or chapters in the CIS that are more advanced and require, taking a specific look at specific customers. And one of those is the data protection, data security controls that are relevant, of course, to many, many customers, but each one of them in a different way. Which brings me to the question of what do you consider are the top five, control groups in CIS8? What would you consider the five most important ones, so to speak, in your process?
So first of all, I think one thing that I think is implied but wasn't explicitly stated, um, if I go back to your previous question, it's about getting buy-in from the customers. Because one of the things MSPs might say is, you know what, let's go and we'll ask the customers if they want CIS8 controls. But think of it as one thing about this is it's also controls for the MSP's usage, so that the MSP will not be blamed for not doing the proper security for a particular customer that got breached and so forth. So once you have that standardized, then that helps protect the MSP's reputation, the MSP's from a liability perspective. But another thing which I think is very, very important is the minute you go through this process, now a lot of MSPs will know that some customers have a pushback against multi-factor. The employees are saying we don't want to use our phone for MFA. We don't want to carry a widget. We don't want to do well. The minute you have this in an Excel spreadsheet and it shows that this is a gap compared to established norms, then obviously this is something that the customer needs to understand. It needs to understand that the customer is signing off that their security is lax compared to what is considered standard today. And something like a CIS8 control can really help you bring that across so that the customer understands this is not just the MSP recommending because he wants to sell something to us, but this is something that the MSP is saying this is a standard today. And if you don't follow the standard, then we might get bitten and it will be our fault and not
Yeah.
the MSP fault because he warned us against this. So I think this is another thing that is very important in creating that visibility. Now, in regards to the top five, then everybody has their favorites list, but I do think that chapters such as identity management and access control obviously are at the top. So to start making sure that all of the applications and all of the systems and all of the assets are all accessed only by approved people and not their kids and not their, and so forth. Making sure that MFA and all that's implemented correctly. Obviously, things such as going through gathering asset information. So whether it's hardware assets, software assets, cloud assets, whether it's applications, going through the applications, right? Obviously, there are, when we think about business applications such as banking applications or healthcare, obviously they're certified and regulated and so forth. But when you choose, for example, a PDF writer, do we choose one from a named brand, which might cost more, like Adobe, or do we use something from some freeware that who knows what it's doing with the data that we're
Yeah.
uploading to it?
Yeah.
So doing assets of that sort, doing security, preventive security, such as antivirus EDRs and all that, um, running through vulnerability assessments, and obviously things such as data security. So understanding for each one of your customers what type of data and what are the implications of that data on the security requirements.
So you touched upon data and the risk of the data, and there are tools to implement successfully each and every chapter in CISI 8. How can Actifile help you meet the requirements of CIS 8, especially in the data related chapter?
So we talked about assets. All of the MSP will know, for example, that things such as laptops and servers and clouds are assets. But data is also an asset. When somebody steals a particular piece of hardware, a laptop, then we know that it's $2,000 maybe worth of laptop, or $1,000 worth of laptop. High end laptop might be $2,000, really high end. But and we talk about the lost maybe software. We talk about maybe it was a laptop case with other stuff in it. So we talk about the that there is a cost to replace that laptop, right? Um, the same is true with software. So if software is corrupted or ruined or other thing, and the same is true with data. And so doing data sort of understanding how much data and what type of data is there from an asset sort of discovery is important, so that you can understand what are the regulatory implications on the business that the business might not be gauging accurately. So a lot of times business people would tell, oh, we don't keep data on our laptops. And then that same person who told you that they don't keep data on their laptop, when you actually run an audit, there's tons of data on his laptop. And he goes and says, oh, yeah, I remember that was a report I downloaded a year ago. And this is data that I collect. I forgot about them. I didn't, I forgot. Maybe we should delete some of it. But sort of, so do an asset discovery of what type of data, understand the risk that poses to the organization, um, both on whether that data gets lost or corrupted, and then the cost of replacing that data. Maybe you do need to do disaster recovery, better archiving and disaster recovery, or whether it's regulatory implications such as fines, penalties, and other things that are associated with that. Other sys controls, for example, are about encrypting. For example, encrypting private data. So put in the controls that help you protect the data, so that you can show to the customer that you're actually helping him minimize the implications of everything from employee mistakes to ransomware, malware, and other sort of attacks.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So certainly Actifile through the data as an asset discovery and monitoring, and through the risk remediation via encryption can help you meet the relevant, CIS 8 data related controls. So to summarize the stuff, how do you see the CIS 8 evolving? How do you see this security framework evolving in the next few years? It definitely advanced in the last few years and got a lot of attention. How do you see it going forward?
So when we looked at, I don't know if you're aware of, do you know, there was a guy by the name of Jeffrey Moore who
Yeah,
talked about in the past about crossing the chasm and all those things. And he talked about early adopters and then mainstream and then laggards. So when we're looking at the evolution of data security, when we're looking at the evolution both from a perspective of the stewards of data, so companies, when we look at it from a perspective of the regulators, when we look at it from the perspective of uh, of the citizenry, right? We see an evolution where in the past it started off with banks, and then the healthcare organizations started joining. And at first it was only the large banks and the large healthcare organizations which could be regulated and could be required to have a CISO organization, CISO, not a CISO, a CISO organization, and have an IT organization and maybe have 50 employees dedicated to securing information and data and the network and so forth, to where it's progressing down that line of the mainstream and eventually getting to the laggards. So when we see this sort of CIS 8 or other sort of frameworks that might come up, then they're really about this, I don't know if it's democratization of the market, but it's making it available and turning it into a standard that not following the standard will have implications. So I
Yeah,
think that's the future.
makes a lot of sense. So thank you very much, Asaf, for I think very highly detailed and quite interesting perspective on CIS and the security market overall. I want to thank our listeners and viewers for their time, and join us in other data security talks that we'll present here in the near future. Thank you very much.